Buenos dias, Gunners Collective TV. Back at it. You already know. Like a torta with some bad habits. Bye up, bye up. Let's get to the intro. Let's clear up everything. Welcome back to the channel. And if you haven't already hit that like and subscribe button, make sure you go ahead and do that. Put your notification bell on all so that way you're directing the direction of the dope content that I stay kicking. And I appreciate the support. I'm very humbled by it. So I just watched a video that Dubs dropped, right? The War Within, about the Nortenos in New Folsom. Okay, I'll say this. There was definitely some internal conflict there. I remember hearing about this in the past. I could verify that what Dubs said in that video was absolutely correct and true. And I remember thinking to myself and telling a couple homeboys, man, damn, what the fuck was that, right? What is going on over there? Why in tarnations are the Norteños utilizing the tactic of red on red? And I understand when one group within feels that the other side, and it's splintered and fractured, are not doing the correct thing, and they were not doing the correct thing, no matter what. They must have got their fucking fools mixed up like a Brent Wood song or their wires crossed. But when one group is refusing to come out to the yard with their enemies, with their opposition, that was not Norteño business. I never, ever, ever got the clecha, the memorandum, the huila, or anyone that ever said, hey, PC up in your cell, don't come out of your cell because of this or that. You know, even if the administration was trying to utilize the Norteños to get the Southsiders off the yard, to give them a reason to remove the Southsiders off the yard, because I'm going to be pretty point blank in this video, right? The Southerners are the only group, I'm going to say it again, the Southsiders, Sureños, Southerners, however you want to call it, they're the only group that go to war with everybody, okay? And when I say that, I say that they fight with the whites, they fight with the Northerners, they fight with the others, they fight with the Paisas sometimes, they fight with the blacks. Northerners will go at it with everyone as well, but it's not all the time. The Southsiders, if they feel they want to dominate a yard and take over a yard, they're going to get off. That's just the facts. That's the truth. And in doing so, administration, the CEOs, they don't like that. They're either going to respect what the Southsiders got going on, or they're going to want to eradicate them from the yard and take them off that yard, because they always got to be under that constant pressure of watching that group, because that group's always into something. They're deep. When they want a yard, they're going to try to debo it, and that's just the truth, right? And so back in them days in New Folsom, what you had was two different yards of Norteños, and you got to understand that was a stronghold for the structure at that time, back in the days, right? Like Dubs was saying in his video. This is kind of my reaction to it, and I'm going to set the facts straight right here. And at that particular time, the administration understood that was a Norteño stronghold, and they started to bring Southsiders onto that yard. Now, the Southerners that were on that yard at that time, and the Northerners were deep, 70, 80 deep. The Southerners that they were bringing over there were basically trash. They were not Southsiders that were like actively engaging in the politics. They were like, it was a trash yard for Southsiders, basically kind of like a 50-50 yard, right? For the Southerners. And the Northerners were not deboing them. They're not applying pressure, because they understood, like, hey, we got it going on here. We're making money. This is our yard. The guys that they are bringing on this yard, they don't want that smoke. They're not with that program. And so whatever. And it was even at the point where them dudes, anytime an active Southsider or someone would come off the bus, them dudes would run to the Northerners and tell them, hey, that dude right there is active. That dude is this. That dude is that. Because they wanted the Northerners to get off, and the Northerners would. They would remove that dude off the yard. And the reason why that trash was doing that at that time was because they knew that as an active Southsider, the first target of that active Southsider to get off the yard because of the curfew was going to be them. He was not going to approach the Northerners. That was their established yard. He might, if they didn't know what time it was, but most of them were laced up and gamed up enough to know that their target, their adversary, was going to be their trash, straight up. So these guys, in a way to prevent that, they would go to the Northerners and be like, hey, you know what I'm saying? These guys are fucking whoop-de-wop. And some of them, they were drug debts or whatever to these particular guys. So they were just trying to kill two birds with one stone, right? And the Northerners were falling victim to the manipulation tactic. But it didn't matter. They had that yard. That was a very established yard for them. Somewhere in the meantime, in between time, and there's big skepticism when it comes to what really happened. There are dudes that were there that said a Wheelock came down saying that they were to no longer function with Southerners on the yard. Well, that would mean to me, if you're no longer allowed to function on the yard with them, then you go get off. And either you guys get sent somewhere or they get sent somewhere. But the guerra is on. But I think whoever was in position there twisted it in his own scary ass way. He twisted it and was like, hey, we're not allowed to function with these guys anymore. So now we're going to refuse to come out of the cell. Now, the other yard with active Nortenos, well-established yard, was not filling that. The other buildings, right? And so it became internal conflict where at visiting, at medical, wherever the active Northerners, the ones that were still with the business, could get at them, they were getting at Northerners. So there's a lot of red on red going on. And I'm sure administration was freaking out. Like, what the fuck is going on? Why are Norteños getting off on each other? Eventually, someone's going to tell, and they found out exactly what it is. Now, let's take it back to when I was in the youth authority. I was a young Norteño. I'm not going to lie. Scared is not the word, but very, very aware. And there was times when I would go to the school area knowing that these guys would show me, these Southerners would show me that they had knives, battery packs. And every day I woke up in the morning fearing what was going to happen, fearing if I was going to make it, but I still went to that yard. I still went outside of that building. I still went to chow. And I was just a youngster, man. I wasn't laced up or gamed up. Everything I was doing for the Northern cause because I believed one thing you were not going to make me look like was a sucker, man. You could talk all that shit. He's from up north. He's a buster. He's a chapet. All that was being said, right? But there was no way I was going to be the coward, right? So I was going to keep continuing to go to yard. And even though I got jumped every day and I had to catch one-on-one fades behind the blinds and behind that bend in the school area, I still kept going. I kept going till they told me I didn't have to go anymore, right? They never told me that, though. So it boggles my mind that while I was doing this and other Norteños as well were making that ultimate sacrifice, and believe me, man, I got scars all over my body to this day to prove what I was going through, right? There's dudes that were fully grown, educated, already seasoned and knowing what it is in New Folsom, a high-level prison, and they were refusing to come out to the yard with the Southerners. That's just the facts and the truth, right? Never before had I ever heard of Norteños going through that or doing that, because you got to think about people who make the sacrifice for years and years and years. And it kind of goes back to the Mongolian. I'll explain it. The symbolization of the Mongolian, which means a warrior, but also at the same time, it was utilized as a symbol for Norteños to identify each other. Eventually, over time, they realized that administration was using that same tactic to identify Norteños, and so were Southerners. And so the Norteños didn't stand a chance. Whereas in the beginning, it was a symbolization for when you went down south to these Southern prisons that were predominantly ran by Southerners, that Northerners were not allowed to walk the yard. See, as a Norteño, you're always in the belief that you are supposed to establish a yard. Unless it's a trash yard, no good yard that there's a curfew on, then of course you're supposed to go get off where you're mad at, get the fuck on down the road, right? But I've always kind of looked at that as a kind of like a PC move. If it's prison, you're going to go wherever the fuck they send you. And you're going to try to establish for your people and accumulate numbers, right? Now, if it just doesn't work out that way, if you get jumped on, if you get ran off the yard, you get smashed, it is what it is. At least you fought your way up out that motherfucker. You stood on your shield, right? You got to respect it, north or south. You got to respect that motherfucker goes to the yard and says, hey, this is what I am, takes off his shirt and gets off. Because there was motherfuckers back then saying, hey, put your fucking shirt on. They said, nah, I'm going to take mine off, bro. And it is what it is, right? I've been on yards by myself. You know, I took my shirt off. I got jumped. It just was what it was, right? But at the same time, that didn't mean I was superhuman or some super gangster. I just was, my belief system and the way I was raised and educated and talked to by older Norteños was like, hey, we never bow down. We always show face. We always go out to that yard. At all times, when that door cracks, you better be ready. At all times, boots laced, right? That was the Norteño philosophy. That was the philosophy that was ingrained within me. That was all I knew at a very young age, right? So when these guys are not going to the yard, and you got other dudes that in the past, like I said, with the whole Mongolian situation, were being sent down to Southern California. We're being sent down to Chino Prison. We're being sent down to Calipatria or Centinela or Ironwood at the time. Prisons that were active and functioning yards, and 2 or 3 Norteños would pull up. And of course, they'd get ran off the yard. They'd get jumped, but they'd fight their way off that motherfucker, right? They're over there making the ultimate sacrifice for the cause. And not because they feel they have to, but because as a Norteño, that's just all they know, right? That's how it's supposed to be. And if you could establish a yard, plant your flag, and figure out your spot on that yard, well, hey, that's what a Norteño strive used to be, right? Maybe it still is. I don't know. It's none of my business, but I'm saying that's what it was. I can't tell you what it is, but I could tell you what it was. Whatever was going on in New Folsom was a PC move, straight up. For anyone to utilize and say, hey, there was a Huila sent, we're playing the games of the administration. They want us to get off on the Southsiders so that way they could eliminate the Southsiders from the yard, right? Maybe so. Maybe that was the reasoning. But you don't fucking do that. You never do what the administration wants you to do. You do what the fuck you're supposed to do, right? Them guys should have been coming out to that yard, and even if the Southsiders would have took flight on them, or whoever else decided that they wanted to take flight on them, that was cold. So when Dub said that's what happened, that's exactly what happened. And there was Norteños in different buildings that basically put the green light on them guys and said, anytime you see any of those cowards, get off, right? I hate to shed a bad light on the Northern cause and say that them guys were representing everybody, because they most definitely weren't. They just refused to go out into that yard, and they utilized that excuse. Oh, we're helping administration. No, you're helping yourself to basically lose a yard that was established for the Norteños for years and years and years. And they did. Ultimately, they end up losing that fucking yard, right? There was Crips and Bloods and Brothers, man, that back in the days had a lightweight, I don't want to sit there and they said had an alliance, but there's always been some good rapport between the Brothers and the Northerners, right? And that's just based off of way back in the days, organizations getting along and having a common enemy and things of that nature, right? But to sit there and say that they were aligned with them, no, but there's always been a loose alliance. When I was in Susanville prison, a lot of the NCs, the Crips from up north, were definitely fraternizing and fucking with the Northerners because they felt some kinship. They felt there was a relationship that was built there on respect and all that, right? So there was some of that going on in New Folsom, but then the Crips and the Bloods realized that the Northerners were not coming out to yard, them specific guys, right? That group, and decided to start playing them, decided to start burning them because they knew that these guys, there was no way for them to come. They weren't going to come out of the cell, so they weren't going to get paid. They weren't going to get what they had coming, right? And we're going back to the Southsiders and literally telling them, like, hey, these dudes is cowards. They won't come out and everything. Now, the Northerners that were getting off with everybody, any chance they got, right? And that's just how that is. They were playing the game right, whereas these degenerates were playing the game wrong. Now, was what Dub said true? Did they lose their yard because of that? 100% facts. This is a story that I heard about way back in the days, and I never spoken on until today, until Dub shed light on it, right? Because I want people to know that it's true. You know, even though I'm an ex-Northerner and I'm not involved in the politics or any of the gang lifestyle, it still hurts my heart to think that that is a part of the history, or that is something that was. And the truth is, it really was. Now, them dudes don't stand for what the Norte meant. They don't represent none of that, right? And ultimately, I believe all gangs, man, you know, there's going to be hitters and hard dudes, and then there's going to be cowards and suckers, man. Dudes that just got with the game for protection or to just identify and think they're cool and bad, and that's why they get the tattoos and their bullshit they do. But I had never heard of anything, and it just makes me wonder and think back on my sacrifices of others when we got sent down south to Southern California, not even up north. These guys were up north in Sacramento, in New Folsom. They were right there, bro, in their stronghold, in the homeland. You know what I'm saying? And refusing to come out of their cell. And Dubs told me, man, he told me a story that he was in a position on that yard at that time of authority, right? Lightweight, and he was able to communicate with whoever he wanted to communicate with, and he actually wrote a Huila, right? And sent it to the Northerners to whom it may concern, saying, hey, this is a bad look. Because one thing about North and South, I'll say this, and it doesn't really get put out there. Back in the days, before the end of hostilities and all that, there was a lot of respect between the two groups. That's why it trips me out when I see online fools disrespecting each other constantly, NK, SK, all that. It's funny to me. Youngsters just don't know, right? Because when you get to them yards, you respect the man for being a man, regardless of where he's from. He could be your enemy, and you're going to show him the ultimate respect. Until that time comes, you have to get off, and you're not going to disrespect him. You're just going to handle your fucking business as a man. That's the way it goes down, right? So any interaction I've ever had with Southerners has always been very respectful on the prison yards. There's never been a disrespect. There's never been going to administrative segregation and listening to dudes bump baking soda breath on the door. There's never been any of that. Anyone who did that was considered a J-cat and was no longer in good standings with his people. That's a fact, north or south, right? Real Sureños, Southsiders, and Norteños did not woof and bump baking soda breath. They just went out to the yard and conducted themselves in a manner of professionalism and handled their business. Period. Win, lose, or draw, it's all about the pull-up, right? The push-up and the pull-up. And that's how you get big. And that's just the facts. For these guys to have done that, right, is crazy. But it's the truth. And Dub said that he wrote a wheelie saying, hey, you guys just come out to the yard, we'll handle our business and do your thing, right? And I understand the extending of the hand right there. Basically, like, hey, you guys are making the raza look bad, because one thing about North and South, like I said, that respect thing. And, you know, if I'm walking the yard, man, and I see a Southerner getting jumped by a different ethnicity, I'm going to stop and be like, either it's not my business is one of the things going through my mind, or, man, I'm not going to see someone, the raza getting jumped on and fucking picked on and beat up. It ain't going to happen. That's just the way we were gamed up back then, right? We were gamed up like, hey, it's none of our business, none of our business. If the blacks and Southsiders are going at it, that's their thing, right? But if they're just fucking beating up on them, some dude trying to run up in his cell and do something bad to him because he's fucking brown, that ain't going to happen. North or South is not going to let that be established. So by them, that certain group of Northerners, again, they didn't speak for everyone, but by them refusing to come out of the cells and utilizing the administration as an excuse, that was just an act of cowardice. And every one of them dudes who did that either got whacked, removed, or are no longer in good standings. See, and that's a catch-22, because you can imagine pulling up as a youngster, 19, 20 years old, first termer. You pull up to that building and, you know, you only know what your homies tell you. You're going to go with the flow. I was always raised that way and educated to go with the flow. But if I seen something wrong, I would single it out. You know, I'm not stupid. I'd be like, hey, bro, what the fuck you mean? We're not going out to the yard. What's the reasoning behind it? I need to know, homie, because I've been told, man, we go out no matter what. I don't care if there's one or two of us. Imagine all the homies that made the ultimate sacrifice, being sent to Chino prison, being stabbed, being removed. They always went out there. So what the fuck you mean we're not going out there? Oh, it's because of this, and that. If it makes sense, then it makes sense. But imagine the kid that's fucking caught up in that situation. He doesn't know better. He's not educated or seasoned. And they tell him, hey, bro, this is what the homies are doing. You know, when we're in Susanville, we had kind of the same thing going on, but it wasn't an act of cowardice. And we wanted to go out to that yard. And every time them doors cracked, we stepped at least 2 to 3 feet outside, or we even went to chow. I remember they cracked our door one time, and me and Bestia from Sacra, who was my telly, we went to chow. Cops snatched us up on the way back to chow. What the fuck are you guys doing? Eating, right? And we need to go back and get self-fed again. What had happened was there was a thing called MAC reps. And a MAC reps is where they take an individual from each group, right? Norteños, Southsiders, Crips, Bloods, others, Paisas, whites, natives, non-affiliates, whatever. And they have some type of committee. It's like a meeting to kind of generate some type of, you know, respect amongst the groups. Now, I always looked at it, and just like the way other people looked at it, is that was a way for them. You were basically telling on yourself that you're part of that group if you became a MAC rep. And other Norteños thought the same way. So when we got to Susanville and we were establishing that yard, our thing was, we're not going to conform to MAC reps, because that's self-identifying, which is a point towards validation. But even more so than that, we don't need to let the cops know that we're good. We are good. And by us not conforming to MAC reps, they decided to put us on lockdown for a month or two, right? And it wasn't an act of cowardice. It was us standing our ground on our beliefs. We weren't going to work with the canine whatsoever. Eventually, we did come off of that lockdown, right? And during that lockdown, there were Southerners at my door every day shooting me sopa, shooting me ice, shooting me fucking coffee, all that. That's a fact, because they understand that we were taking a stand for our beliefs, and they respected it, man. That's just what it is. So what them dudes did in New Folsom, that's the truth. Dub said there was inner conflict. Yes, the ones that weren't agreeing with it were getting off on the ones that were doing that shit. And in doing so, them Norteños, man, they lost that yard in New Folsom, and that's the truth. Dub's video was point dead on. He was there. I wasn't, but I had heard that story way prior to me even meeting Dubs. I just never put it out there, because at the same time, I hate shedding a bad light on what I once was. See, I'm not a disgruntled employee, even though I'm not active and I'm not part of that gang. I hate to see a Northerner look bad, man. I hate to see a Southerner look bad. Maybe it's just the way I'm built. With that being said, let me know what you guys think. Thumbs up or thumbs down. Heavy's going to be the head that wears the crown. I'm going to continue to strive, struggle, and strive for what I honestly and truly believe in, and that's the betterment of all people. Gracias. Bang, bang.